of vacuum. Thank you.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of New Zealand First on the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Bill. New Zealand First will oppose this bill in its current form. While we see many positive aspects of the bill in that it will provide a long overdue environmental management regime for New Zealand's 200-mile limit, known as the EEZ, or the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf, we do have concerns about some aspects of the bill. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS, New Zealand has an obligation to manage and protect the natural resources of this 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Mr. Speaker, this is an area 20 times larger than the landmass of New Zealand. It's the 5th largest economic zone in the world. It is enormous, and New Zealand, with only 4.5 million people, is fortunate to have such a large area of ocean and seabed under our environmental management. This bill will include the environmental management of activities such as mining of the seabed, energy generation, carbon capture and storage, oil exploration and extraction, and also marine farming. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First does, however, have concerns in relation to the fundamental purpose of the bill, as did many submitters on the bill who came to the Select Committee. As a member of the Local Government and Environment Committee, I have filed a New Zealand First minority report, as have other opposition members of the Select Committee, arguing that the purpose of this bill is a contradiction in terms. The purpose of the bill states it seeks to achieve a balance between the protection of the environment and economic development, which are two countervailing and at times totally contradictory forces. The bill would have it that there is a balance and these two factors will compete on a level playing field as if it's a 50-50 proposition. For instance, it allows deep-sea drilling of oil, gas and minerals, providing its contribution to economic development outweighs its adverse environmental effects. How would you quantify that proposition? What if the proposition is determined to be greatly in favour of the economic benefits, but with significant adverse environmental effects, say on a 70-30 split, for example? What would that sort of balance achieve in terms of the outcomes? Would this government then steamroll it through, as it does in so many areas, because they would say, oh, it's still balanced, it's 70% in favour of the economic returns, therefore, you know, the economic returns are balanced out by the effects on the environment. We've seen too often with this government, Mr. Speaker, that there's an eagerness to grab the short-term dollar, such as the asset sales, over the long-term adverse effects on New Zealand, the New Zealand economy, and the people of New Zealand. After all, this government is happy to steamroll through all those state assets when polls show that at the present time, something in the order of more than 70% of New Zealanders oppose those asset sales. Would this government conveniently ignore those adverse environmental effects because the dollar signs all looked so tantalisingly appealing? Would they do that? Would they sell out the environment for a quick money trader's buck? You betcha they would, Mr. Speaker. You betcha they would. New Zealand First believes the default setting should not be a balance, but should be robust environmental protection, introducing economic development strategies conditional upon minimal environmental risk. This should be non-negotiable. New Zealand First is not against economic development if it is environmentally sustainable, but this bill could allow intensive exploration of offshore oil, gas and minerals to push the boundaries, overriding environmental risk calculations. The risk of environmental catastrophe is huge. Insurance and financial penalties are not high enough deterrents, as the Gulf of Mexico disaster clearly demonstrated. In times of economic recession, as we have now, there's also huge pressure to create jobs, pay off debt, sell off assets, increase value in financial returns, and exploit natural resources. There is also a subtle difference between writing legislation not to create barriers to investors and actually encouraging foreign investment. Again, the bill would seem to tilt the balance in favour of fiscal advantage over our environmental endowment. The financial benefits are readily quantifiable in dollar terms now. This is instant gratification against the long-term devastation of New Zealand's environmental and economic future. The idea that the government can pick winners has been proven wrong time and time again. New Zealand stands on the verge of succumbing to what is known, and this is a term that is internationally recognised, it's called resource curse scenario. This is the easy fix temptation to focus on exploitation of natural resources which could deplete skills, employment and investment money from other major sectors. For instance, under a resource curse scenario, the real long-term economic advantages of tourism could suffer, as could New Zealand's pristine image, because of short-term exploitation of our marine environment. The bill should replace malleable concepts such as sustainable development, precautionary approach, favour caution and adaptive management to eliminate unintentional ambiguity. Giving too much room for movement could backfire in appeals to the High Court and the inevitable court battles. The legal fraternity have pointed out to the Select Committee inconsistencies with international law, so this could be a field day for lawyers in the future in terms of our 200-mile zone. In view of the above concerns, New Zealand First is unable to support this bill in its present form because it potentially lowers the environmental protection threshold in the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. New Zealand cannot afford to jeopardise its extraordinary marine environment. We must get this bill right because it has huge implications for our nation. If we get it wrong, we might see New Zealand's favoured geographic position on the globe in the clean waters of the South Pacific Ocean being subjected to huge environmental risk, the consequences of which could have far-reaching effects on our marine environment, on our coastline and on our 100% pure image as a tourist destination. New Zealand is a maritime nation. The marine environment with its ecosystem sustains thousands of jobs, billions of dollars in income each year from a wealth of industries, tourism, fisheries and energy just being some of them. New Zealand has a unique association with the marine environment dating back to the initial arrival of Maori and more recently Europeans. Throughout the history of New Zealand, it has been a source of pleasure, of food and transport. The oceans around New Zealand and around the world are being increasingly exploited for their huge mineral and food wealth. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First in its election manifesto clearly stated that we support urgent introduction of interim standards for drilling and exploratory work in New Zealand waters, a requirement that all drilling and exploration projects in New Zealand waters be subject to public consultation and full public consultation, and that we set up and train appropriate to the risk rapid response teams to deal with maritime environmental emergencies that can be deployed at short notice in New Zealand or abroad. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First will oppose this bill in its present form and urges the Minister to agree to amendments which will provide greater environmental safeguards being sought by New Zealand First and other opposition parties, while still allowing for economic development within the 200-mile zone, but ensuring that the environmental risks are put there as paramount and as first safeguards in the process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Nikki Kay.
Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to be speaking on this legislation.